House of the Dragon just premiered its fiery season finale, and let's just say, many of us are still recovering from that ending. The season has its ups and downs, but it left us on a huge cliffhanger that has us asking questions for what's next. In today's video, we'll provide a recap of everything from that finale, as well as some questions we have about the future. So let's dive right in. First off, the ending of House of the Dragon's first season starts off at Dragonstone. The final episode of season 1 mostly took place at Dragonstone. We see a brief glimpse of Rhaenyra with her son Luke. It then cuts to Rhaenys, who has apparently arrived with some pretty sad news. Rhaenys let her niece and Daemon know that Viserys has died. Plus, she revealed the Green's plan to usurp the Iron Throne. The Sea Snake's wife shared a very ominous warning to Rhaenyra that the Greens were coming for her and her children. The shock and stress of the situation were apparently too much for her to handle, and it caused her to go into early labor. And of course, that meant that we had to watch yet another difficult birthing scene. What's with the writers of this show and brutal births? While the princess screamed inside right next door, Daemon was ready to call the banners and every green he could find. He began preparing for war. The princess called her son Jace and Luke and revealed what was happening to them. She also commanded Jace to act as her heir and not let things go out of control while she's giving birth. With someone like Daemon around, this was definitely a needed precaution. That said, poor Jace isn't able to control the rogue prince from doing as he pleased. Rhaenyra knew that she couldn't be bedridden while the realm plunged into war, and so she literally forced her child out of her body. The child was stillborn and unfortunately didn't make it. In the books, she's described as a girl who's named Visenya. Next, we get a funeral scene and Rhaenyra's coronation as queen. Daemon took a break from all the political planning to give his daughter a Targaryen funeral. Despite all the trauma she'd suffered, Rhaenyra personally wrapped her daughter up and made preparations for the funeral. It's a pretty sad scene, and Emma's performance in the scene truly sells it. In just a few short moments, the princess has learned that she's lost her father, her daughter, and that her half-brother had usurped her throne. It's a lot to go through, but there's a bit of hope to the scene. During the funeral, Sir Eric arrived from King's Landing, and he brought along with him the crown, which previously belonged to Viserys. The knight swore his allegiance to Rhaenyra, and the funeral ended up serving as an impromptu coronation as Daemon placed the crown on the newly appointed queen's head. Plus, Rhaenyra immediately took on the role of queen. Even though she'd suffered a lot in such a small time, Rhaenyra wasn't planning on sitting idly by as the banners of war were surrounding her family. Along with her advisors, she began discussing all the potential houses that were still allied with them. If you're a Game of Thrones veteran, you might recall hearing familiar names like Stark and Aeron. Daemon seemed to think talk of men wasn't as important though, because in his eyes, Rhaenyra already had a weapon more powerful than any mere soldier: dragons. The rogue prince apparently knew exactly how many dragons were at Dragonstone, and if you haven't been keeping count, there are about 13 of these things, and not all of them have riders yet. As they were discussing their plans, Otto Hightower arrived at Dragonstone with a message from King Aegon. Otto shared peace terms with Rhaenyra, stating that Aegon in his generosity was willing to forego any act of treason. Plus, he'd officially give her Dragonstone and legitimize Luke as the heir to Driftmark. All of that was great, but it still meant that she'd have to leave her rightful claim on the throne. And so, Daemon was completely against the idea. But the queen, wanting to do what's best not just for her, but also the realm, decided to take a day to think over the terms. Otto also presented Rhaenyra with a memento that Alicent gave to him. So there's definitely some feelings of affection that she still has for her childhood friend. We should also mention, Daemon was a loose cannon this episode. Everyone pretty much knew Daemon was kinda unhinged since the very first episode. But over the season, people had hoped that he was changing for the better, and it turns out that isn't really the case. Daemon confronted Rhaenyra for not taking immediate action and burning Otto and his men when she had the chance. The queen explained how she didn't want to rule over a kingdom of ash and bone. Plus, she brought up Aegon the Conqueror's dream, the Song of Ice and Fire. And surprise, surprise, Viserys never told Daemon about the prophecy. This realization caused Daemon to lash out at Rhaenyra, and he even began choking her. Rhaenyra fans, looks like they aren't exactly the healthy power couple you dreamt they were, but to be fair, their relationship was pretty problematic from the very start. Up next, the Valyrians chose their side in the war. Lord Corlys was thought to be on the deathbed because of a wound he sustained while fighting in the Stepstones. But after arriving at Dragonstone, he seemed to have recovered. While the sea snake was just about ready to stop all this warmongering and political scheming, his wife Rhaenys reminded him that the war was coming and that they had to take a stand. And so the Valyrians gave their fleet, which is one of the biggest in all of Westeros, over to Rhaenyra. This also meant that their side gained control of the stepstones and could block off the trading passage to King's Landing. The queen also needed to know whose allegiance she had and who'd turned the cloak. So she sent her sons, Jace and Luke, on dragonback to House Arryn, House Stark and House Baratheon to remind them of the oaths they took to her all those years ago. We were then shown that shocking ending. While it seems things were turning around for Rhaenyra's side, she may even consider opting for Aegon's peace terms. But all that soon changed when she received news that Luke had died while on his mission to Storm's End. Luke had encountered his uncle Aemond there. After his message to the Baratheon Lord got rejected, the young prince was making his way back to Dragonstone when his uncle accidentally lost control of his dragon and chomped the poor kid in one bite. As she learned about the news, there was only anger and hatred on Rhaenyra's face, and it's clear that she's coming back for blood in season 2. Moving on, here are some of the main questions we have after the finale. First off, was the whole first season essentially a prologue? Considering the events we've been shown, it isn't wrong to think the entire first season was more or less just the prologue that was meant to set up the Dance of the Dragons. The real crux of the story and the major bulk of the Fire and Blood books deal with this civil war. And so yes, the first season was mostly an incredible lengthy prologue. Interestingly, we've only covered a short part of the storyline in the first season since a lot of these details weren't in the book, but we'll likely start seeing more of the events mentioned in the books as the dance really gets going. Up next, was Luke's death really just an accident? In the books, Aemond is described as having purposely killed his nephew, but it seems the show has taken a different route altogether. In the finale, we saw that Aemond lost control of his dragon when Luke's Arax breathed fire on Vhagar. This caused Vhagar to get angry, and she chased after Luke before finally chomping both Luke and his dragon. Fire and Blood is described to have an unreliable narrative, so it wouldn't surprise us if the change was done to illustrate this fact. It's possible that when Aemond returns to King's Landing in season 2, he'll claim that he killed his nephew on purpose, even though we all know it was just a horrible mishap. This change also perfectly goes along with a bit of foreshadowing that happened earlier in the show when King Viserys mentioned that dragons weren't meant to be controlled by mere men, and the idea that Targaryens control them is an illusion. This episode couldn't have made this clearer. Finally, is the whole point of the show to just not have kids? From all the nightmarish birth scenes to the blood-hungry kids running around looking to murder each other, we can't help but feel like the moral of this story is just to not have any children. Just about every kid in the series is an absolute pain to their parents, and the ones that turned out well, like Luke, get turned into a quick meal for dragons. That's a wrap for this video. What did you think about the final episode of House of the Dragon's first season? Comment below, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.